Jesus said, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also."
New economic numbers indicate a slowdown on several fronts, and perhaps worse, our confidence in a recovery is slipping.
Trading day started with a dramatic free fall, the Dow dropping over 1,000 points, and after some half-hearted rallies, ended down more than 3.5% off 588 points.
It looks like Greece has become the first developed nation to not pay its debts to the International Monetary Fund on time.
France is bracing itself for the economic impact of the Paris terror attacks. Now there are fears that the latest death squad rampage may bring a downturn that threatens France's recovery.
Thanksgiving is only 3 weeks away. For shoppers, Black Friday starts earlier than ever this year. JCPenney opens at 5 p.m. Thanksgiving night, and that is 1 hour sooner than most rivals.
Americans owe $700 billion in car loans, more than $800 billion on our credit cards. But student debt now tops $1 trillion.
There is a better conversation. There is a higher calling. There is a kingdom perspective. We have an opportunity here and now to join God in advancing His kingdom with our clients, in their families, around the world. What if God used your influence to resource the work of His kingdom? What if your work was a platform for ministry? What if God wants to use you right where you are?
So it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mitch Anthony. Many of you may have already heard Mitch. Mitch is recognized as a leading expert in the fields of financial life planning and building client relationships. Mitch has countless speaking engagements. Over the years, he's spoke on behalf of mutual funds like Van Kampen. I understand that recently he was at the Praxis conference and spoke there. Mitch's programs are currently being used to train advisors in financial service companies around the globe. Additionally, Mitch is the best-selling author of several books, including Story Selling for Financial Advisors, which is named the #1 read for advisors by Financial Planning Magazine. The New Retirementality, Planning Your Life and Living Your Dreams at Any Age, and it's now in its 4th edition. And the Breakthrough Financial Education series for children called the Financial Lit Kit, featuring The Cash in the Hat, Where Did the Money Go, and The Bean is Not Green. Mitch is a consulting editor for Research Magazine, and his column Financial Life Planning appears in Financial Advisor Magazine. His column America's Retirement Coach appears on Seeking Alpha. Mitch has been named one of the financial service industry's top movers and shakers by Financial Planning Magazine. His work has been featured in ABC Evening News, CNN, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CBS Market Watch, and Kiplinger's Magazine. Mitch's radio feature, The Daily Dose, is heard daily on 150 radio stations. He's also the founder of several nonprofit organizations, including ReasonsToLive.org, an international suicide prevention effort. Our Extra Mile, a partnership with the Mayo Clinic that provides air miles for cancer patients, and Peer Power, which is an international youth empowerment and life skills education effort. Mitch, I don't know how in the world you found the time to be with us this morning, but we are very, very grateful you did. Thank you for joining us in this effort. Please welcome Mitch Anthony.
Thank you, Brad. About, I think it's 10 years ago, right about this month, I woke up. I had one of these 3 a.m. wake-ups that wasn't related to pizza. And I saw this in my mind's eye, this triangle, and the words with the triangle were God, man, and mammon. And the thought that came to me was that there's almost a Bermuda triangular tension between those three. And that there's no way for any of us to escape that tension. As long as we live on this planet, we will have to negotiate and navigate in that tense triangle. And our devotion to God will always be tested by our need for funding. And so God is here, and money's here, and man is here. And in the 10 years that have ensued, I have been absorbed in the Scripture, studying everything I could find about this topic of God, man, and mammon. And I thought, well, you know, when you get these ideas, the last time I got an idea like that, the word was new retirementality. So I just figured, well, I'm supposed to write a book. But I've written the book 3 times and no one will publish it, so I guess I was wrong there. And even my Christian agent who went to Christian publishers said, Christians don't even know what mammon is, Mitch. You can't have a book with the word mammon in it. So with that advice, I've sort of changed the title here to The Fiscal Philosophy of Jesus, 3 big ideas about you, your money, and your God, because people don't know what mammon is. So maybe we need to educate them about what mammon is. And so I want to read a familiar verse to you. Oh, where'd the text go? Okay, don't worry, I've got it. Oh. So we're accustomed to reading this text out of Matthew 6, but I want to read it out of Luke because it's different. There's a different context that's painted here. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, is the way this translation puts it. The word actually is mammon. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Can you imagine this context where Jesus is talking about the tension between the love of God and the love of money? And these Pharisees are sneering. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Because what does sneering imply? It implies they're sitting there saying, this guy doesn't get it, does he? Just follow the money. It's about the money. And how jaded, how many of you have taken note of this in your business career, how jaded people become over money? It's always about the money. And the Pharisees were about the money, and Jesus pointed this out in front of the masses and said, God knows your hearts. You're all about the money. And what's admirable to people, the Forbes 100 or whatever it is, that the world bows down and says, wow, look at that person. Aren't they amazing? Look at the money they have. And how many really wealthy people have you met who walk around with the attitude, I must be amazing, how else would I have this money? Anybody besides me met those people? I must be brilliant. I met a man who made tens of millions of dollars installing vending machines in Europe. He came here as a student exchange student and saw hot coffee, hot chocolate machines, and they didn't have them in his country. He went back and he came to the conclusion he was a genius. Well, it's debatable. I'll give you credit for a good idea, but it doesn't make you Einstein. Right? And the world just worships the people that have the money. They must be brilliant. And Jesus said that which the world admires is detestable in the eyes of God. Now, that doesn't mean God detests people having money. What is it he detests? Us thinking people matter more because they have the money. Because they have the money. Now, I'm going to try to get in the cadence of how these words appear here. This is new territory for me. There we go. So here's our prelude to what I want to share with you today. I'm going to share 3 big ideas about you, your money, and your God. But the prelude to this is that money is the most popular idol, and greed is the most pervasive form of idolatry in our culture. My friend Dick Wagner puts it this way: money is the secular God. If you're not truly worshiping and devoted to our Creator God, there's a pretty good chance you are bowing at the altar of mammon. Jesus juxtaposed and said it's an either or. It's not an and if. It's an either or. It's either you're bowing here or you're bowing here. And as I've studied the rich, I've found that they have their own commandments, their own thou shalts. Right? And one is thou shalt fawn over the rich. Thou shalt make them feel special because they have the money. And this is why we have the warnings that we have in James chapter 2 about how we treat people according to how they look. Right? And the second thou shalt is thou shalt appear richer than you are. And isn't it ironic, and I'm sure you've all noted this, that no matter how much money people have, they're always trying to appear that they're at the next threshold. And the third thou shalt is thou shalt do everything in your power to drive your children to become rich. Now, I don't know how many of you read the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Moms by Amy Chua that came out a few years ago, as she's a professor at Harvard. And she talked about how she drove her children. Her children didn't have overnights. They didn't have playtime. They didn't play with Legos, right? She drove her children. She picked out the instrument they would play and made them play for hours a day. When they failed to comply with her oppressing methods, she was heard calling them garbage and despicable. You now have services that for somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000 will guarantee that your child gets into the right kindergarten. Now we enter into the tuition costs of being in the right kindergarten and the right grade school. And then as they begin to mature and reach puberty and adolescence, they now can go to academic camps. And folks, there are no s'mores and fires at these camps. It's rigorous. It's $7,000 to $10,000 a month. And the kids this is how they're going to spend their summer. Then you can hire tutors for $30,000 to $40,000 that will guarantee placement in an elite college. And then other tutors to help you learn how to take the test. None of this covers the cost of tuition in the meantime and the cost of tuition in the future. We have people literally investing $500,000 or better from the time before in the pre-kindergarten to the end of the process here. Why? To make more money. To make more money. And what happens in this process? What is the message that the kid gets? They become acolytes at the altar of mammon. So what if our kids grow up and make millions and lose their own soul? This is what we face. So here's the heart of the matter. We're all familiar with these verses in Matthew 6. The heart follows the money. A modern translation would be, you can't have two bosses. And what is the mantra of the money boss? It's more. I can't count the conversations I have in the average month with financial advisors and financial planners who are weary and worn down and threadbare from the mantra of more. I love my clients. I love what I do. I'm doing well by everyone I work with. I don't need any more to support my lifestyle, but there's a constant corporate drumbeat saying we need. Anybody in this room weary of this drumbeat? This is the drumbeat of that boss. More. And it's more for what sake? For the sake of more. There's no reason for more, it's just more. Now, we could have the excuse of quarterly earnings if it's a publicly held company, but that's just a machination or a construct designed to feed greed. And so he tells us that our heart follows our money, and then his next phrase is, be careful what you're looking at. Because the eye lights the soul. And if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? In other words, if you're looking at the wrong thing for inspiration and motivation, you're going to get filled with darkness and dread. And it's going to be such a great dread and darkness that it's going to overwhelm you. Anybody ever felt just a wisp or a hint of what that darkness is like when you thought you'd be happy with something materially or some line you crossed financially? Anybody? Let me see your hands. Have you ever had that experience where you crossed this line and you thought, this is really going to be amazing if I could ever get to this place, right? And then you crossed it, and what was there? There was absolutely nothing there. Because our contentment is in our God. And that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, if your eye is single, your whole body is full of light. But be careful that the light that is in you is not darkness, because if it is, how great is that darkness? Therefore, you cannot serve both God and mammon. You got to be careful where you're looking for your contentment. What you're looking at, who you're looking to. So, Paul tells us, don't be greedy. For a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of the world. So the three big ideas that seem to rise out of the Scripture, and I have to tell you, in these 10 years of studying the New Testament and what it says about money, and strictly, I shouldn't even say the whole New Testament, the four Gospels. What I've been most surprised by is how much is implied about money, how much is inferred about money, not just direct passages like given it shall be given unto you, those sorts of passages that are often communicated from our pulpits, but a couple observations I've made in these 10 years of studying the Gospels is that there's just a select few verses that get quoted from pulpits, and they seem to be verses that help to raise money. But there's so much more in the Gospels that infer money issues or imply money consequences that I never hear preached on anywhere. And I'm asking myself, why haven't we heard about this? Well, the first big idea here in the Scriptures that seems to rise from the Gospels is that, how do we get back there? My first speech, is that wealth is not measured by money. Now, I've taken some liberty here in capitalizing words in this verse. Jesus said, watch out and guard yourself from every kind of greed, for a man's true life does not consist of the things he owns, no matter how rich he may be. Watch out and guard yourself from every kind of greed. Now, this makes me wonder if he was implying that greed goes beyond the borders of the material. I often am tempted to be greedy with my time because I only have so much. I have sort of a limited pie of time in my mind. And so I'm tempted to be very stingy with my time. I can be stingy with my observations, or if I see someone struggling with something and I could come alongside and spend a little time and help them, but you know, along with being stingy with my time, I might be stingy with my observations as well. I might have an idea that could help someone that the world tells me is a competitor. And I can be greedy with that. Every kind of greed, he said. And then he talks about, in this translation, it says a man's true life. And it makes me think, well, if there's a true life, there's a false life, isn't there? And what is the false life all about? The false life is about appearances. It's appearing to be something. And a true life is a life that's just transparent. We are what we are by His grace. We count on Him for everything. And none of this is mine. You know, I remember reading in C.S. Lewis, one of C.S. Lewis' books, he quoted, I can't remember the name of the theologian from the 1700s, who said that hell's anthem is, I am mine alone. Don't tell me what to do with me. And that's the temptation we have on this planet. And this is why people worship at the altar of mammon. Why? Because if you get enough money, you never have to listen to anybody again. Have you noted the hubris and the arrogance that comes with great wealth? How many of you have noted this? Right? And the rudeness that can come with that. Right? I don't have to listen to you. I've got the money. I am mine alone. Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. And so this is where I want to turn the conversation, is to what does this rich relationship with God look like? And we're all familiar with this story. I'm not going to read the story, but I just want to highlight a couple aspects of the story of the rich young ruler. In those times is no different than in these times. That it's like sometimes I go to a really nice golf course and somebody walks on the course and you just look at the way that they're put together and you just kind of know they got more money than other people do. Right? Well, in Jesus' time, it was really out there, right? If you had money, you looked completely different than the masses did. And so when this man showed up on the scene, everybody knew who he was and what he represented and that he was somebody. And I find it interesting that he didn't come with his entourage, right? He didn't come with his bodyguards. It says that he came running to Jesus and fell on his knees and said, "Good teacher, what must I do?" And Jesus' first challenge said, "Why do you call me good? There's only one good, and that's God." And then Jesus went on and quoted what to him? Commandments, right? Don't lie, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't commit adultery, right? He quoted these commandments. And the rich young ruler on his knees in front of this crowd said, "I've done these since I was a kid." And it says Jesus loved him. Jesus loved him. And then he tells him to sell everything he has, give it to the poor, and follow me. And he went away sorrowful because he had many possessions. And it wasn't just about the things he owned, it was about the status it bought him. The privilege that it bought him, the lifestyle it bought him, the autonomy it bought him. He could call his own shots in the life he was in, and now he has to give up all that autonomy. I find it interesting to note the commandments that Jesus didn't quote to him. Why did Jesus quote 6 commandments and not the first 4? He didn't quote the one about having no other God before you. He didn't quote the one about having graven images. that you bow to. Didn't quote the one about taking the Lord's name in vain. Didn't quote the one about keeping the Sabbath holy. You see, the first 4 commandments are about your direct relationship to God himself, and the last 6 commandments are about your relationship to your fellow man. And I wonder if Jesus was trying to imply to this man, you've got the wrong God. You're in your heart, you're trying to do all the right things, but you've got the wrong God. And it's no small irony that the most prominent form of graven image in that day were on coins themselves. They had the images of either rulers like Caesar or Roman and Greek gods. I find a little bit of irony in that. Rich toward God. We have another example here of what that means, and I want to read this. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give it, and he'd been invited by a prominent religious leader to dinner or a luncheon. When you give a luncheon or dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you'll be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid as at the resurrection of the righteous. And then he shared the parable of the great banquet. When one of those at the table with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast of the kingdom of God." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, 'I had just bought a field and I must go see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' 'Sir,' the servant said, 'what you've ordered has been done, but there's still room.' Then the master told his servant, 'Go out in the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who are invited will get a taste of my banquet.'" Now, I'm not sure that Jesus is trying to teach us dining etiquette in this story. I don't know that if we're invited to a luncheon or dinner, we should turn to the host and say, "Why'd you invite all these people?" Pretty amazing, pretty audacious, isn't it? Why did you invite all these people? But in this parable, what happened here? There we go. Note the excuses. They're all financial. "I just bought a field. Got to go look it over. Just bought some new farming equipment." Oxen were basically the equivalent of tractors in those days. Right? Got to go look it over. Just married a wife. She's got a Visa card. Don't know what she's doing right now. Right? Who buys a field, then goes to look at it? Who buys 10 oxen and inspects them after the sale? What's this really about here? We're just distracted by money. Right? We have these obligations. I wish I could help you. I wish I had time, but I've got these apartments over here, and I got this over here. Anybody besides me come to the conclusion that things you own are just a big distraction? Right? I used to think owning stuff was really cool. Then I found out you can rent things and you can walk away. For rental by owner, look it up. No taxes, no insurance, right? You walk away. But this is what happens. We get encumbered by the distraction of taking care of stuff we bought. And it chips away and erodes our devotion. It's not like we meant it to be that way, but this distraction eventually morphs into absolute preoccupation where we are just consumed with making decisions around things we own. The next big idea that I find in the Gospels around money is that there will be a final accounting of what we do with our money. And I want to read the account of John the Baptist. John said to the crowds coming to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father,' for I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the trees, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." "What should we do then?" the crowd asked. John answered, "Anyone who has 2 shirts should share with the one who has none, and anyone who has food should do the same." Even the tax collectors came to be baptized. "Teacher," they asked, "what should we do?" "Don't collect more than you're required to," he told them. Some soldiers asked him, "What should we do?" He replied, "Don't extort money, don't accuse people falsely, and be content with your wages." Now, isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that when they asked John how to demonstrate repentance, that all of his answers were related to their behavior with money? Every single answer. In other words, if you want to prove that your heart has changed, show me your behavior with money. That is the absolute proof that your heart has turned. Anybody ever been ripped off by someone with a fish symbol on their business card? Their heart hasn't been turned. The greatest financial losses I've had in my life were from a brother in the Lord who used that relationship to take advantage of me and took my mother for everything she had. I've got some conviction around what I'm saying here today, folks. Got pulled into the temptation to get more. Got in so deep, couldn't find a way out. All the while having prayer meetings with his staff while he's ripping off his clients. What happens to the heart of people? Money can harden hearts if we allow it. So to the common people, John said, if you've got 2 shirts and somebody has none, give them the shirt. Give them the shirt. I'm going to talk here in a little while about the excess in America. We've got so much, and I know I've got more than I need, and I've been trying for the last few years a ritual of every year going through my closet and asking, have I worn this in the last year? And if I haven't, I'm going to give it away. We got to find a way to create some parameters in our life because we have too much excess. And then the tax collectors, what should we do? And he said, don't collect more than what is due. This is about margins. If you read the implication here, this is about what is a fair margin. The Department of Labor, look at the language. It's about being fairly compensated. What is fair compensation? We have CEOs of pharmaceutical companies going to prison because they're gouging the people that need their medicine to stay alive. We have other pharmaceutical companies that are under scrutiny right now, and they continue to raise their prices to exorbitant. Has anyone in this room been put off by what pharmaceutical companies do to the people out there? You see, it's about what is a fair margin. Now, no one can give you the answer in numerical fashion. It's a matter of conscience, isn't it? A fair margin is a matter of conscience. And John said to these tax collectors, don't collect more than what's due. Make sure it's fair. And then to the soldiers, don't use your authority and your position to extort money. It's another temptation on this planet to use our position and our authority to make more than we should. And the other thing is, soldiers were public servants. And public servants knew when they became public servants that they weren't going to get rich. It's like when I talk to school teachers who are discontent with the money they make. Did anybody tell you before you became a teacher you weren't going to get rich at this? Be content with your pay. Do a good job with what you do. So John is telling the masses that the evidence of a repentant heart is transformed behavior with money. There will be a final accounting. Now I want to read another story, to pay or not to pay. When they come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he'd come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you've opened its mouth, you'll find a piece of money," I believe it was a 4 drachma piece coin, "and take that and give it to them for me and you." When it comes to taxes, this is a perfect place to have this conversation. What do I really owe? What should I really pay? And Jesus anticipates this. And he validates the logic that this temple tax really is not for the sons, it's for strangers. And he validates the rationale that Peter's already built up in his head. Nevertheless, he says, lest we offend them. We don't want to offend them. Why? Because the world is waiting to say, "Ha, I told you so. They're just like everybody else." The world is waiting for you and I to demonstrate that when it gets down to the bottom line, it's really about the bottom line. And when we look the world in the eye, where there's a profit that rationally or logically belongs to us, and we put our hands in the air and say, "You know, I don't want to bring any offense here, and if that means just leaving this on the table, I'm going to leave this on the table." Our minds are wired to rationalize why we should get what we get. And Jesus, with his nevertheless, is saying, that's not the question. The question isn't what can we get by with. The question is what will withstand divine moral scrutiny. And all of us, in the light of that, can take a different look at what we're doing and how we're justifying what we're taking from any situation. The third big idea, we've got that wealth is not measured by money. There will be a final accounting. And the third big idea I see rising from the Gospels is this idea that your means can be filled with meaning. And we're all quite familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. And one of the things that's always sort of amazed me about that story is the idea that Good Samaritanism does not require just an open heart, but it requires an open wallet. Because he dropped the injured man at the innkeeper and said, "Put it on my tab." It was an open tab. I have to be quite honest with you here today. I'd have a hard time just picking somebody up, injured and maimed on the road, and taking them to any hospital, knowing what hospitals charge today, and saying, "Just send me the bill." Anybody else here, would you find that difficult? Right? Because you feel like you're going to be taken advantage of. But that's implied in this story of the Good Samaritan. Now I want to talk about the challenge in front of us. This is the country we live in. Today, we have storage facilities that could house every man, every woman, and every child in America with 7.3 square feet of space. You would not see anyone on a playground, anyone in school, anyone in a workplace, anyone in a church. We could literally house our nation's population in storage facilities. Americans spend $22.5 billion a year storing stuff that they don't use. The majority, over 50% of storage facilities that are open aren't even visited for 3 years. This is how badly people need the stuff. The average kid in America has 238 toys, 12 of which they play with. We are a nation of excess. $22.5 billion to house things we don't use. I have a storage facility. I have a car in that storage facility about 7 months a year. I'll tell you a story about that in a moment. I want to share some more research with you. Well, before I do that, I want to tell you a story. So I was teaching a class of young people aged 19 to 25. I had 30 people in my class at my church. And I was teaching them about money. And I suddenly got this goofy idea. They really don't understand stewardship. Their stewardship is a spiritual concept that has to really get into your heart. And I asked the pastor and the church board for permission to do an unusual experiment. And I had 30 people in my class, and so I went to the bank and I got 30 $50 bills. This was my U.S. grant experiment. And I came to the class and I said, now, if you want to be a part of the experiment I'm going to lay out today, you have to commit to being here next week. And you have to tell the story of what happened. And I had an envelope, and I said, I'm going to pass this envelope around. I want you to take one bill out of the envelope, and I want you to put it in your wallet. And your mission in the next week is to wait for the Holy Spirit to speak to you about who to give this to, who to bless with this, and then come back and tell us the story. And we're just going to trust that God's going to guide us all. And they were expecting to pull out a 5 or a 10 or maybe 20 at most. And I was seeing their eyeballs dilate. Right? When they were $50, oh my goodness, and they're stuffing it in their pocket. Well, anyway, a week passes. This is one of the funnest things I've ever done. The first story was so outrageous that nobody wanted to share their story after that. So the guy says, well, I have this friend, and he's still in high school, and he was going to run away from home. He was leaving home, and I said, well, let me take you to Taco Bell, and let's sit and talk about this. And he said, I've got this $50 bill in my pocket, but I'm not thinking it's for this kid that wants to run away, right? Or for the Taco Bell lunch. And he said, and this is in Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is, and it's not that far from there. And he said, while we're talking, he said, I noticed this guy over here kept eavesdropping on our conversation. He was just sort of standing there by the drink well area. And I finally looked at the guy, and he said, hey, and the guy, oh, hey, and the guy says, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. I can't help but overhear this conversation. And I think I have something to tell your young friend. He said, I'm here right now in this town because my child needs medical help. We're living in our van on the street right now. I'm in here trying to figure out with the little bit I got in my pocket, if I got enough to feed my family today. And I want to tell you, young man, I'm here today because I did exactly what you're thinking of doing when I was your age. I did it. Then the Holy Spirit said to my friend, give him the 50. So he reached in his pocket, handed the man 50. He started bawling like a baby. That's the first story. Then a Christian girl said, I'm embarrassed to tell all of you this, but she said, by Friday I was in a panic, and it suddenly dawned on me that I had no one in my life that was in need. I had insulated my life to people like me. And I had no exposure to people in need. That, to me, was the most searching report. How well we have insulated ourselves in our creature comforts, in our comfortable lives. And remember what Jesus said. I want to go back to, what does it mean to be rich toward God? Go get the blind, the lame, the halt, the maimed, right? It's surrounding yourself. Obviously, these people come to the dinner because they know you. They trust you. Surrounding yourself with people in need. And then finally somebody spoke up at the end and he said, this was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because he said, I realized every time I looked at that $50 bill that it wasn't my money. And then I knew the coin had dropped on stewardship. It wasn't my money. Or as Ron likes to say, God owns it all. It wasn't my money. I was talking to my daughter last night. She's a missionary. And when she was home with us, Mom would give her the visa to go grocery shopping. And she said, Dad, every time I looked at that visa, I just thought, that's like the cross of Christ. Of course, this is a missionary daughter. This is, how can you correlate the cross with a visa, right? But she said, everything's paid for. And Mom just trusts me to go get what we need for the house. Everything's paid for. Ownership gets in the way. It really, truly gets in the way. So, there's been some research done by a group a couple researchers in Illinois. I think it's Champaign, Illinois. It's called Empty Tomb Incorporated. And they say that for $70 to $80 billion a year, we could provide clean water, sanitation, prenatal, and infant care, basic education, and immunizations across the planet. $70 to $80 billion a year would meet that total need. If every church member gave 10%, the fund would grow to $86 billion. And there are people in this audience that know better than I do what the statistics are on the percentage of people in evangelical churches or any kind of church who give it all. Who give it all. So, here's the challenge I want to bring to you. You are kingdom catalysts. You are in a position to have conversations about money. You are in a position to influence people philosophically about what money can and cannot do in their lives. You're in a position to ask questions people need to be asked about wealth and its shortcomings. Money needs to go in motion to the kingdom to wrap this whole thing up. And I have to tell you a story about money that's sitting there and money that needs to move, and how hard it is for us to move money. Because this industry, and we've all been a part of this, has scared the wits out of people into believing they'll never have enough, hasn't it? Right? And consequently, people are frozen and paralyzed with assets that they could be moving. And there are so many people that could be moving money into the kingdom. And you have an opportunity to search your own heart and search the relationships in the circle of influence that God has placed in your life and ask yourself, who should I be having conversations with about these issues, about money emotions? So about 3 months ago, we had an evangelist come through our town and visit a church where a friend of mine is the pastor, and he invited me to come listen to this evangelist, and he was an interesting guy, and he has a ministry called Global Outreach, and he goes all over Africa. And so I took Dean and Carol, his name is Dean, and his wife is Carol, and I took him to lunch, and I said, Dean, what is your most pressing need right now? He said, we badly need a good truck in Uganda because the roads are incredibly unsafe, and the truck is worn down, and it's in bad shape, and we pray every day. And he said, my real dream is to get one of these Unamogs. I don't know if you've ever seen a Mercedes Unimog, really wide chassis, and they can navigate really bad roads. He said, we'd like to get a used one of those that's still in good shape. And so I had this thought. I thought, I've got this Porsche, this 2008 Porsche Cayman, little silver car that I love to drive in the summertime. And I get in trouble with it once in a while. I had a policeman pull me over last summer, and he said, do you know how fast you're going around that turn? And I said, I don't know, 60. He said, you're going 65. I said, and the limit's what, 60, right? And he said, yeah, but you said that's a wide turn, and you were going 65. And I said, officer, with all due respect, why do you think I bought this? For that turn. That was the one. He said, you just watch it. Right? Well, so I'm talking to Dean, and I'm thinking, this car sits in storage 7 months a year. And I've had my fun with it. And I say, you know what, Dean? I think I'm going to sell that Porsche, and we're going to buy that Unimog. I'm going to put this thing up for sale. Now, in my mind, and I don't know why I thought this way, but in my mind, I needed to sell the Porsche first. Get the funds, send the check. Now, I didn't have to do it that way. That was just, in my mind, the way the account should move. So I put the Porsche up for sale on some online places, and it wasn't selling. And I'm waking up now. This is about a month ago. I'm waking up, five weeks ago, I'm waking up almost every morning, and the first thoughts that's hitting me is Unimog. And it kind of gets spooky, right? And I finally just make up my mind. This one morning, I wake up and I make up my mind, I'm just going to call Dean and tell him we're going to send the check, and I'll wait to settle the account when the Porsche sells. I'm not going to wait any longer. Well, I got up that morning, ready to call Dean, and I look at my text, and there's a text from Dean. And it's tragic. 2 American pastors had gone over to visit this Ugandan ministry. They're in the truck. The brakes fail. The truck crashes, turns over, is squashed to where it looks like a compact car. There are 3 dead pastors, 3 widows, 10 children left behind. And I don't know what to make of it. And I called Dean, and I'm like, Dean, I just don't know how to process this. And he said, it's appointed a man once to die. God knows everything. You can't put that on yourself. But he said, how do you want to respond? And I said, we'll send you the check. And I'm going to expose in the rest of this story just the human frailties that get in the way. And so my wife and I have a conversation, well, what fund should it come out of, and how do we want to do it, and do you want to do it on a credit card so we can get air miles for it, and all these different, then that conversation got confusing, like, okay, which account is it going to come from? Do we need to liquidate something? And then my wife gets busy, I get busy, and now another 4 weeks have passed. And I told Dean, we're gonna get that truck. We're gonna get that truck. And so this is just so ironic. I have to tell you this story because the timing is just way too ironic. So yesterday in the airport in O'Hare, I'm flying here. I get a text from Dean, and I want to read this to you. This is from the people in Uganda that Dean forwarded to me. They have been searching for a replacement vehicle for Sister Kawisa. They did this undercover so as not to get her hopes up should anything not work out, as it often doesn't when so many make promises but can't, for whatever reason, keep them. Interestingly, Sarah, this is a woman who lost her husband, the ministry director, announced to her son that God had told her someone is buying her a vehicle. So she didn't want to spend any of the money they'd received from the tragedy on anything but winning souls, that the kingdom of darkness would not prevail in the hearts and minds of the people in the wake of the loss of her husband. So this ministry had raised enough money to go buy another truck and sent it to this woman who'd lost her husband. And she said, no, that money will go to win souls. And God told me that he has somebody that's going to buy me that truck. Can you feel what I'm feeling here? We're sitting, God, I know I'm that person, and that check is in Dean's hands Sunday. We're going to see him personally. But we're sitting on assets, brothers and sisters. We're sitting on assets that the world has told us cannot move. But that may not be what our master is saying. And this really is a matter of faith. And as this industry continues to shout into people's hearts and souls, you'll never have enough, people get stifled and they get paralyzed with fear, and then their faith, and what it exposes is that our faith is in the money. Our faith is in the money rather than the provider of the money. And we're given a choice here of what we're going to believe in, what we're going to trust. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm overtime. How far overtime am I? Oh, I'm sorry, Brad. I apologize. So, okay. So I received a phone call, and I forgive me, I'm cutting into your break here a minute. But I received a phone call from a brother like yourselves in Louisiana the other day, and he said, Mitch, I'm teaching a class of 500-some people in my church, and only 179 of these people are givers. And he said, I want to use the grow, live, give conversation. I want your permission to use that conversation. He said, I'd like to challenge you to build a website where these church people could go get a grow, live, give chart for free to see where their financial life is at. And I said, well, you're asking a big thing for me to spend a bunch of money and create a free website and people to use this tool, and it's going to cost me a lot of money to build this thing. So I said, I need to know, Greg, what's your game plan here? What are you trying to do? He said, well, it's very specific. He said, these people are not my clients. I have a financial advisory business, and I'm doing just fine. These people are not my clients. He said, I am going to move $500 million into the kingdom. So help me God. I'm going to move $500 million into the kingdom. So help me God. And I got to thinking, 80 billion takes care of all the basic needs around the planet. We only need 160 Gregs. We might have 40 of them in this room. But it's going to take that sort of intentionality that I'm here to help move money into the kingdom. Thanks.